Gone is gone, dead is dead. Is there really any reason for you to hold any kind of funeral or ritual or ceremony for your dead Buddhist loved one? Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Where and however an aim is accomplished through eulogies, chants, good sayings, donations, and family customs, follow them diligently there and that way. From the Kosala Sutta. If rituals help you, if eulogies help you, if chanting and family traditions help you, then let them help you. There is more than one way to celebrate and bury or cremate the dead in the world of Buddhism across the various traditions. And I'm going to share some high-level perspectives just to get an idea, but I'm not going into great detail because that's actually not the purpose of thinking about it today. The purpose of thinking about it today is just to consider the concept of rituals and grief and how they play a part in our grief journeys. So in Theravada, generally there's a belief that rebirth happens right after a person has died. So the funeral would involve a shrine with a dead person's picture, possibly an image of the Buddha, and some candles, flowers, and incense, most likely. And in order to assist the dead person's transfer to another rebirth, relatives will offer charity to monks or to a monastery in order to gain positive karma. And we continue, I'll say we because I'm a Theravada Buddhist, after someone dies, we continue to do good things in order to give merit, so that even though that person, when they're gone, has already transferred, the giving of merit can help them in the rebirth that they moved on to, and to help them with, some of the karma, for lack of a better term, that they have to burn off, right? So charity to monks or a monastery, looking for that positive karma for the deceased. So in Sri Lanka, for example, perhaps maybe cloth would be given to the monks on behalf of the deceased, and the monks would use that cloth for their robes. A monk would lead the funeral service, and that would involve, giving a talk, a Dharma talk, and carrying out important rites. Monks will recite mantras, which are reminding us, the mourners, of impermanence. And typically in Theravada Buddhism, there's a cremation. You don't have to do this if you don't believe in cremation. You don't have to do any of this. I'm just sharing, again, high level, general, how things go, not even the, actual step-by-step details. So following the example of the Buddha, people are cremated as the Buddha was cremated. But again, the person might be buried. Your family might have a preference. Family members usually help during the ceremony by carrying the person and lifting them up, which marks the final stage of the funeral before the cremation. And then 1 week, 3 months, and 1 year after the death, monks will typically visit the home of the relatives and lead ceremonies to help increase the dead person's positive karma. So that's something that might happen. In Mahayana Buddhism, when someone is dying, if you have this opportunity, if you know they're dying, right? Sometimes we do. When we are aging and ill, we are very often aware that somebody is in their final moments. If somebody, goes instantly of a heart attack or an accident or something, then this isn't possible, and that is not something to be worried about. But if we can, then we might be whispering the name of the Buddha into their ear so that it's the last thing they hear. After death, the body is usually cremated. The funeral takes place typically a few days after, to allow the first stage of rebirth to occur. So in the Mahayana tradition, rebirth isn't instantaneous. In Theravada, there's that belief that, the rebirth occurs right away. But there's various stages that can take up to 49 days or for 7 weeks. And definitely I have had friends who've gone through those stages, and, I've seen them share about maybe their parents' death and where they are within the 49 days, and sharing an altar with the parents' picture and incense and Buddhas, and talking about where they are. Often the 49 days is referred to as the bardo, and that the transition isn't complete until after that time. In Japan, when a body has been cremated, relatives will sometimes retrieve the bones from the ashes and place them in a burial urn, and they're going to look for the feet. So yes, if you have not seen the cremains of someone, we're not reduced 100% to ashes, and so they can tell what the feet are, the feet bones, and they will make sure that they put the feet in the urn first so that they're not upside down. In other words, then, symbolically ready to take that journey. The urn is then buried in a family grave, which could be at a temple. Tibetan, or, Vajrayana, if it's possible, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is read to the people who are dying, but is also read to them even if they're recently deceased, because even if the person has already died, it can be believed that reading this can assist that departed soul in moving between rebirths, right? So there's a concern when you've got a situation like in Mahayana and Tibetan where you've got the belief that somebody hasn't fully transitioned yet, that they might be in that bardo, that you can help them transition, and that you do certain things to make sure that they don't get stuck, right? So definitely doing this to assist them in moving between rebirths. Not all of the Tibetan traditions are going to use the Book of the Dead, but all will chant guidance and wisdom to the dead and dying as they move towards their next rebirth. Now, even though I am a person in the West, and I'm talking to, as I look at who my audience is, you're largely in the West. And so I don't know that right now I'm talking to anyone who is in Tibet, but maybe that will happen. However, historically, what you want to remember is that Tibet is mountainous, and it's difficult to find a burial site, and it's difficult to dig through the earth because some of it is under almost like a permafrost. It's dark, it's cold and hard. And it also is sparse, so hard to find firewood for cremation. So what traditionally has occurred is what was called a sky burial. And this is sometimes difficult for people from the West to process, because this is very different for us. But this is where the body of the deceased is placed high up on a hill or a mountain so that it can be eaten by vultures. And so basically it's a returning to nature. It's an understanding that whatever made that body your loved one is no longer there. And now we're giving the body back, and we're giving the body in a way that it can be used in a way to support other beings, such as vultures and other animals. I'm going to just insert here that I notice in today's world, we are starting to investigate and look at different ways of burials here in the West, some of them meant to be more in harmony with nature. So sky burial, very much in harmony with nature. Monks will chant mantras around the body, and if the vultures eat the body, then the deceased had no sins. That might be a belief, which I guess also means if the vultures reject my body, then I guess that's a commentary on how I may have lived my life and my karma. But so once the vultures have done their work, the remains of the body are collected and then burned. So what's left is burned. Prayers are said, lamps are lit, with oil and offered every 7 days. So a sky burial is regarded as a lesson in impermanence as the body is given up. And it's also seen as a last act of generosity because, again, you are feeding those vultures. Okay, so that's at a high level, the three schools, traditions. And within those high level scenarios that I've shared with you, there's a lot of different detail and ways of being, depending on what country you're in and what your temple practices and what your monks teach you and what your family has done. Who is this all for? You might share some of the beliefs we just discussed, or none of them. And sometimes people feel burdened having to pull together ceremonies and rituals, especially if they don't believe in it. Why should I do this for someone who's gone? Why? Well, why? It depends. What if some of this is right and it does help your deceased loved one have a better rebirth? You wouldn't stand in the way of that, would you? I hope not. Or if you would, and if you really think you are doing a lot of work for no reason, perhaps with your compassion, remember that you are putting others at ease. So, so often our rituals are about taking care of the living. It might not be helping you, but it could be easing the way for the grief journey of others around you. To some people, it's very important to know that they held the service or ceremony that their loved ones would have wanted. That last way of showing love and respect. Funerals are an obvious reminder of impermanence. I hope they should be. I get that some people go and they really shut down and don't really pay attention to anything. But for most of us, it is a reminder of impermanence. Now, in the Kosala Sutta, and we have led in earlier in today's episode, we led in with some passages from that. In the Kosala Sutta, the Buddha is giving a teaching to King Pasenadi, who is grief-stricken because Queen Malika died, so his beloved queen. And in his teaching to the king, the Buddha remarks that only a well-instructed disciple realizes that this will happen to everyone. When I say this, I mean aging, sickness, death, that things end, and that the destruction, the breakdown of things and the breakdown of the body. So if I were to sorrow, grieve, lament, beat my breast, and become distraught, food would not agree with me. My body would become unattractive. My affairs would go untended. My enemies would be gratified, and my friends unhappy. So a skilled disciple recognizes that this was going to happen. It was always going to happen. And, so if you go back to the example of being at a funeral, sometimes people are at a funeral and they get that they're witnessing death, but they're still detached because this is someone else's mother, or this is going to happen to someone else. But a skilled disciple gets it, right? This is going to happen to everyone. It's going to happen to my mother. It's going to happen to me. And so in this way, a skilled disciple doesn't grieve excessively. And so this is not saying do not grieve. It's discussing excessive grief. That whole lamenting, beating my breast, distraught, couldn't eat, I would become unattractive, my affairs would go untended. That's the result of excessive grief. And it's discussing how we can torment ourselves if we don't realize that this happens to all of us. My point in bringing up this passage is that rituals for the dead can serve to remind us that this is happening to everyone. We will all be touched by death. We will all mourn the loss of others. And one day others will mourn us. And let's not be attached to any other belief or thought. And a specific ritual can be a milestone. The milestone marking the grief journey. You notice that each of the general scenarios that I shared with you, high-level ideas about Theravada funerals and Mahayana and Vajrayana or Tibetan, they all had sequenced activities. maybe a blessing or a chanting or a ceremony, but all occurring at specific times. And these sequence activities help to lead a person, a family or a group, through their grief. Acknowledging and supporting the process, reminding them and others that grief is part of their lives. And if you step back and look at a community, really look at it like from a high level, a community, there are times when most members of the community could be in different stages of these sequenced grief rituals. And that creates a shared experience. Grief is that process that is with us every day. And I thought about this, and this is what surfaced for me, because in our previous episode, Tracy shared with us about grief and rituals and grief as an ancient ritual. And so we maybe don't need to be attached to the why or the how or the type of ritual. Maybe we won't even need to be attached to the idea that there is a ritual. But we do want to remember that we've all got that shared experience, that grief is that process that we live with every day. But again, from the Kasala Sutta, the sutta ends with, where and however an aim is accomplished through eulogies, chants, good sayings, donations, and family customs, follow them diligently there and that way. But if you discern that your own aim or that of others is not gained in this way, acquiesce to the nature of things, unsorrowing with the thought, what important work am I doing now? What a skillful question. What important work am I doing now? I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.